We're going to take questions now, and I can see that John Cummins is first up. So, John, ask the question, and we'll begin there.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I thought it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
It seems the point of Georgism is to try to put the economy on a ethical foundation,
Yep,
much
exactly.
like the Bitcoin entrepreneurs claim they are doing. However, I don't understand how their system actually accomplishes it, but to me, it's very clear how your system of patents and royalties on natural resources and patent limitation could do that very thing. So
Mhm.
thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you. And to jump off of that, the idea of Bitcoin is so that essentially they're trying to create a monetary system that doesn't rely on centralized governments. And it's I think it's a flawed idea. And in the next presentation that deals with money, I'll specifically go into why it's a flawed idea. Bitcoin is essentially trying to become the new gold, and that is not what you want in an economy. So we will discuss that in the next presentation.
Thank you, John. Ari, you're up next.
First, before my question, I do want to acknowledge Sam or Samuel. This was really fantastic. I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart I have gratitude of this. This is, in my humble opinion, exactly what the world needs us to come together around these kind of things and really create social capital for. So I really salute your effort and I really appreciate it and I thank you.
Thank you.
Moving directly to my question, you mentioned intellectual property in a very robust way that I totally agree with. My father is a patent attorney, so I have a deep understanding, and I couldn't agree with you more. The
Mhm.
specific question is, what would be the mechanism of action that would replace this? I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that in a future talk, so I don't want to ruin it. But if you're meant to talk about it here, I'm really curious what a substitute was, or even a moderated, like if you say we don't want to get rid of capitalism, we just want to have a limited or a modified version of. Do you have some sort of suggestion that specifically addresses not just the problem, but really offers a robust solution?
hmm Yeah, so that's a good question. This is something I'm actually thinking very deeply about because uh, in my eyes, I have basically discovered a solution for land and for money, and I think IP is probably the last frontier of things that I would like to discover a solution for. But there's already a really good solution out there. I don't think it's exactly perfect, but it is much better than what we have already. And it's what I went over briefly in the presentation called a harbinger tax. So essentially, this tax, what it's supposed to do is essentially
Could you say that a little bit slower? Sorry, I heard that before, but
harbinger.
do you think we could like spell that in the chat or something? I just want to look it up.
Yeah. Let me see if I can put it in the chat. There we go. It might be Harburger. I'm not sure, but whatever. So basically, what this tax is basically uh, it's a self-assessed tax. It could be about anything, really. But applying it to IP, the idea is that you place a value on your intellectual property, and then you get taxed a certain proportion of that value every year, and the proportion will be increasing across time. So maybe over 20 years or whatever, you can raise the percentage of the tax from 0 to 100% of the actual IP, and then
Is Sorry to interrupt. Is this like a revenue that you're getting, or this is a penalty, like a discount rate, but in the negative form? Like you're going to first get taxed 2% and the next year 4%, and these are like the taxes on the earnings that you would have gotten from this. Is that the idea?
No, so you will value it based off of your own projections of how much you'll earn it from it, and then that valuation will get taxed. Simultaneously, the IP is not a monopoly. It'll be a license. So other people can also license the IP for the rate that you have specified. So whatever, value you've put on the intellectual property, that value will be taxed, or will be the value that other people can use to license that intellectual property from you. So you're not blocking anyone from using the IP, but at the same time, you're also incentivizing people to come up with ideas and share them with society because they are getting compensated for it.
Can I just have you confirm this sounds more like a license or a royalty method? Is that what
Mhm.
you're sort of describing?
It
In a
is,
very
yes.
general, and I know it's not exactly the same, but I'm just trying to conceptualize it.
Yeah, it is. It is. Other people might conceptualize it differently. Maybe other people in the Georgist movement might conceptualize it with, full monopoly rights. I'm more about the licensing rights. I don't believe the monopoly rights are a necessary, um, you know, incentive for knowledge creation. And time again, we've seen many different kinds of knowledge creation formats and movements in technology where monopolies are not required, especially in programming. My area of expertise, the open source movement, is a very good example of that.
Okay. Thank you, Ari. We'll go on to the next question now, and that's Bud. So, Bud, the floor is yours.
Um, so just kind of a more of a larger anthropological question. Um, does the does this system is it robust enough to hold up in an environment where the moral commons is not very robust?
The moral commons.
Yes. Are you familiar with the term?
I'm not familiar with moral commons. Like, are you talking about like a social contract or?
In effect, where your entire society has a common overall understanding of what is good, what is right, what is wrong. It is the constraints that undergird everything else.
Mhm.
It's the implicit rules that we all generally agree by. But if the a commons is robust, is if everyone shares generally all the same things.
Okay.
But when we have a multi-plural society, um, you that commons breaks down.
Mhm.
And so, um, if we cannot agree that stealing uh, is bad, then you'll see more people stealing.
Mm. Okay, so
So,
yeah, so this sounds like how I envision the idea of a social contract. I think it's pretty much the same thing. And obviously, this is a talk on economics and not on anthropology or politics. So you can embed this system in any society really, and it'll work. But yes, there are requirements of, people believing in, for example, the ethical justification that I gave in the very beginning,
mhm.
where people have to follow that idea and follow the reasoning of, okay, yes, we are not uh, able to own other people or other bodies. And then, okay, we're not able to own other people's outputs. And, this is a very, philosophical
Mhm.
train that they have to kind of progress across. And certain people or certain societies might not make it all the way across to the end of that ethical line of justification. And if they can't, follow that, then I guess there would be issues um, with implementing this in such a society, or even if a society where half of the people agree and half of the people don't, that would be an issue.
Mhm.
Additionally, a lot of these issues are caused because half of the population, the landowners, are benefiting from the system, and half of the population, the renters and the homeless, are very much not benefiting. They're getting hurt by the system. And so what we have is a system currently that is essentially driving a wedge halfway in between society. And those who are above the wedge, you know, get rise, and then those who are below the wedge will fall even further down. And this is, uh, unearned income is that's the nature of it. So right there and then you see a stratification of the society where half of them uh, will think one way and half of them will think the other way. And so that's kind of one of the main issues actually with trying to get Georgism to be more out there in the mainstream and implemented as well.
Hmm.
Uh, in what would be the perfect conditions for the application of Georgism? What society would be perfect for Georgism?
Sadly,
Hypothetically.
yeah, sadly, it would be the perfect society would be one that is starting anew, because then there's no, talking about, oh, you're taking my land away from me, oh, you're, taking the things I have away from me. So that's one of the major issues with implementing Georgism. And so starting a new, maybe in third world economies where there isn't an entrenchment in land ownership, or economies that are even economies that are going through housing crises where people are starting to go for anything and looking for any kind of solution that would possibly get them out of this mess. Uh, you know, those kinds of things would probably be the best areas to implement Georgism.
Okay, thank you, Bud. We'll just go on to the next question now. So, Heather, can you? Uh, it's yours. It's your turn. Heather.
Hey, sorry, just trying to figure out my phone here. Okay, so that was interesting. I was just trying to figure out, I didn't hear you talk about things that are very land intensive, like food production. Now, and you're not just taxing the profits, you're taxing the land, and presumably the land taxes would have to be much higher than now. So it just seems like you're disincentivizing food production.
Okay, so this is a common question. First of all, by taxing land, we're removing taxes on everything else that a farmer, for example, would have to pay taxes on the sale of his crops or the sale of his livestock, taxes on any buildings that he has, taxes on any company that he might own, things like that, income tax, stuff like that. Second of all, a land value tax is actually perfect for farmers as well, because what does the land value tax do? It's a tax on the value of the land. And farmers already, they place their farms in areas where the value of the land is not that high, right? Because land value is high where people want to live, right? In cities, downtown cores. These are the areas where real estate is very, very, very competitive. The land value tax will take those areas and tax them a lot more so that they're incentivized to use their land as efficiently as possible. Because when a piece of land is getting taxed the same amount, no matter if you build a bungalow on it or if you build a 20-story building on it, and that location is apt for a 20-story building, well, then people are going to build 20-story buildings. And this is how we solve the housing crisis, by encouraging people to utilize the land efficiently. But
Yeah,
farmland,
it's not necessarily true though that people farm where people don't want to live. Like for example, the Niagara region has quite high land values, but the land is also pretty unique for farming in terms of like its microclimate and
mm,
how warm it is relative to most places in the province.
well, it's still
Um,
perfect because the land value tax, as I said earlier, is going to prevent inefficiencies in building. And so what that encourages is it encourages efficient use of land, and it discourages sprawl, because sprawl is just taking land and utilizing it as inefficiently as possible. So when you concentrate people into city cores and build large buildings where people can live within close proximity of all the things that they need, well, then they don't need to go and sprawl out into the farmland where people are trying to grow agriculture. Additionally, land value tax is going to essentially make sure that whichever is the best case utilization for that piece of land, that is the utilization that wins out, right? Because the way to determine the best case utilization is, okay, which utilization will make the most money and therefore earn the most rent that can be taken in tax. So whoever's willing to pay the most amount of rent for that piece of land will be able to essentially determine the use and the value of that land. And so that's how the market determines what is best for that piece of land.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just see farming as one example, but basically you would be incentivizing um, probably a lot of services that use next to no land because they're basically, going to have all their profits and not have to pay any taxes on it. Whereas things that use land, like there's a huge investment well, in farming, like if you're growing fruit, you have to grow trees. It may be, a decade or so before the trees are actually productive. Like that's just a huge investment. And all the while, they're paying the taxes based on the land value, which is the same whether the trees are, fully grown and producing or, just planted and have a decade or more to go before they're productive.
So we'll talk about.
There's other industries where I can see a problem too,
Okay.
because again, they're like very land intensive in terms of building and anything that requires a lot of investment in the land when the land is not owned by that person and is taxed very highly, they're going to be quite reluctant to go in that kind of business.
Yeah, so this was, like I said earlier, this is only half of the solution. We'll talk about a lot of the things you talked about in the next presentation, things such as loans, things such as profits, the things that you mentioned, uh, being able to make an investment today and reap the rewards in the future years. These kinds of things touch on how we utilize money, and at the end of the day, it touches on interest. So. Those kinds of things will be talked about. So this is only half the solution, and hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Okay.
you can
Thank you.
wait for
Thank,
that.
And it,
thank you,
it just
Ed.
seems to me
Thank you.
like a lot of tech companies, again, well, they already make massive profits, but, would make even more profits because,
Yeah, we'll
very
talk about
little,
profits. Don't worry.
little taxes. Okay.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Heather. Thank
Yeah,
you,
That was
Heather.
good.
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. John.
Yes, thanks, Ronan. I don't have a question actually. I would like to, congratulate Samuel on the quality of the presentation
Thank
and
you.
also the questioners, if that's the right term, on the quality of the questions which have been asked so far. I just wanted to point out something to you, Ronan, that I noticed that some people, like in the thumbnails, as a lot of thumbnails, have been putting up their physical hands
Hmm.
to ask questions. And of course, we don't notice it. So I just wanted to reiterate, and maybe you want to iterate to everyone.
Yeah, I haven't noticed that. So yes, if you are putting your hand up, instead, can you please just use the hand up icon in the Zoom menu to put up your hand, and I will definitely get to you.
Yeah, and the admin. Yeah, thanks, Ronan. I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that.
Yeah, the icon is reactions.
Right. Right.
Okay, so now, Tori, you can go.
Okay. Thanks, Ronan. And thank you, Samuel. That was a good overview of the Georgist approach to taxes. Thank you for going into the different aspects of it as well, the different, you might say, economic aspects of it. I'm just curious that I think the real kind of weak spot of the Georgist scheme is determining that land value.
Yeah.
And mentioned there's two sides, there are two approaches, assessors or market value. But assessors I think would essentially go to market value. I mean, everything becomes market
They would
value.
attempt to, yeah.
Right. So, but I think the problem is it's never gonna, there's no, absolute value to land, either in, Toronto or worldwide. The land value is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Which is another way of saying market values will be the ultimate determinant of the land value. So, I mean, you can certainly separate land value from the value-added constructions or agriculture or activities that
improvements
on top of the land, but it's the land value is always going to be changing. It's going to be going up and down.
Yep.
So, or probably mostly up as the world population increases and things like that.
Exactly.
So the how you can actually determine that land value, it doesn't seem like you'd ever have a finite value, since it's so kind of changing and ephemeral. I mean, there's various arbitrary ways of saying the value added of the activities on top of the land. I mean, over time, if people migrate from one city out to the countryside, obviously the land value in the country is going to be higher now.
Yeah.
And the former values of the city are gone. So you can't really
So you're saying it'll
it's a
be
moving
constantly
target.
changing. Yeah, and it is a moving target. That's definitely the case. But
Well,
I don't think.
and like I would like to say, emphasize Heather's remarks that if you're, you know, people build structures for long term or do agriculture for, for long term use,
Yeah.
and you can't. It would inhibit investments in land for specific uses if from year to year the land value tax would be changing. They'd never be able to calculate a return on investment if they knew that the picture in the future was so uncertain on
Mm.
what they'd be paying in tax. So I don't know. It seems like that's the big black hole in the Georgia scheme that would disable the thing. I mean, there's really not. I've heard that there are attempts to implement some degree of Georgist philosophy in different countries around the world, like Taiwan or Denmark. Somebody mentioned in the notes,
Yep.
In the Netherlands.
Singapore.
Well, but I have not heard of the empirical results as to, how that has produced any of the remedies that you speak of, like resolving the housing crisis and things like that.
Well, Singapore is a good example of doing just that in such a small location, having a tax policy that is partially Georgist. It's not fully Georgist, and it's not really, the best implementation of Georgism, but it is at least partially inspired by Georgism, and they were able to essentially house a huge population in a small island with essentially the entire city is high rises, and
Right.
and everyone is living in affordable housing that is within apartments, and so that's a good example of one case. I'd like to touch on your earlier point of the moving target.
Mhm.
And I think this is not an issue with Georgism. It's an issue with economics in general, right? How do we justifiably um, say that, okay, we should allocate this resource to this location, this resource to that location, or we should allocate this amount of things here and there if we don't know what the conditions are going to be like in the future? That's the major issue that you're talking about. If we don't know what the population is going to be like 10 years from now, if we don't know, the next government is going to be doing such and such with immigration, if we don't know that, okay, uh, pollution is going to be a huge issue 10 years from now, and certain locations will not be livable, things like that, then how can we plan for the future and invest properly? So that's an economic issue in general. I don't think that's specifically a Georgist issue. The Georgist um, approach is to try to compensate everyone fairly for the things that they take from society and return those things that are taken back to society. I think that should be that should be fairly um, universally agreed upon, whether or not the economy in the future can be predicted properly.
Thank you, Tori. We're just because there are so many people asking questions, we're going to go to the next question. But Tori, you can go back and ask if there's time. But we have lots of people. So Peter Ginsburg, you're up now.
Thank you very much. You have a hospital which you want to run as a nonprofit. Next door to
I'm
it,
sorry, it's very hard to hear you,
Can
Peter.
you speak up, please, Peter? And
you
it
have
would
a
be nice.
hospital.
It would be nice if you can turn your camera on too, as well, if you can. You don't have to, but
There you go.
okay, great.
You have a hospital that you want to run as a nonprofit. Next door to it is a luxury hotel. The two buildings have the same footprint. Please explain how this system is going to work.
So the way the system is going to work is essentially the hospital is going to have to be located in a location where it makes sense. So the location has to be, an area where where it's able to essentially collect the amount of earnings from the populace such that it is able to pay the rent for that location. You cannot have uh, a an area of land within the downtown core of a city that is not being properly utilized. If there's a housing crisis and people want to use that land to build housing, then it's not the location to build, various different things, no matter if they're a charity or not.
You need your hospital to be close to your population. You realize that.
Okay, well then that the market will be the determiner of that. If the market determines that okay, this location is in dire need of a hospital, well then, the earnings from that hospital will reflect that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting answer. I mean, I would have a question for that answer, but I'm not going to ask the question because I'm the moderator. So I'm going to move on to Ari. Ari, you're up.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
great.
I want to, and at first, I really appreciate your defense, and I don't want to feel like an attacker, like everybody is putting you. But there are some definite real holes, and I think it's actually like you're saying, it's more a problem with economics, but it requires really non-market solutions. The market is not gonna be able to do this. And I want to talk about this from a slight meta principle, and then ask the question from this meta principle that there are essentially morality is about making choices based on values, and a lot of values are outside of what's just worth money. For instance, if you have, let's say, a beautiful island where there's certain turtles that are the only turtles that will leave there, live there or mate there, but you could make the land value of that an amazing luxury hotel, right? How do you tax that? How do you prevent that? There's certain sort of non-monetary items I would call priceless items in nature, similar to just the farming idea, that the farm cannot compete against the huge building. There needs to be essentially what modern developmental groups have, or developmental urban economics has, is zoning. And this requires politics of people choosing that, oh, this is going to be zoned for farming, and then it is according to farming land value principles. Or this is going to be hospital zoning, and then it's going to be similarly taxed to other hospitals. But luxury hotels are going to outperform. For instance, in the simple, I feel like contradiction to this is like California, for instance, was a beautiful area that the future everybody just wants to be tourists, or like Airbnbs. Then the whole place becomes tourism because that will outperform economically. And then you have a whole land of just tourists. And you don't want a whole area like this tourist because they will not have the same moral incentivization or behavior as locals who are invested in a long-term residential behavior. And you see this as a problem with Airbnbs, as like communities that are robust, getting some either gentrified or other ways where money is replacing morality. And this is, to some degree, a big hole in overall economics. And I don't know if Georgism is meant, this is where the question is Georgism even trying to address this, or is it just sort of ignoring this completely?
So my answer would be Georgism, the Georgia system is so amazingly efficient and kind of beautiful that it ends up solving a lot of these moral issues without even strictly trying to do it. So I'll address your first question about the turtles on the island, for example. Two main approaches that could happen with that. First of all, someone or some group of organizations could if they feel very strongly about this cause, they could be the ones to take control of the island and make sure that they outbid anyone else who's trying to rent the island for purposes of development. That's a very strong possibility. Or you could have what we already have, which is nationalization of specific areas of land, right? We already have national parks. This is the society coming together and saying, we want to make sure that certain plots of land don't get appropriated by individuals and stay in the commons, right? And so then you can have certain parts of land like that island stay in the commons, and that's a very viable solution. And then you also talked about Airbnb, for example. Yeah, I mean, Airbnb by itself, it's a business. There's nothing wrong with that business. People want to rent out their apartments, individually without having to, have a uh, having to go to a hotel and things like this. And it's very efficient for people to leave for the weekend and rent out their place for other people who are coming in on the weekend, things like that. It's a market that adds a level of efficiency to the economy that was not there before. The underlying issue is the housing crisis, which is, uh, pushing, people to not be able to afford housing, and then Airbnb, simultaneously raises the rents because everyone is trying to, come in, and therefore, um, Airbnb is, seen as the issue. But the issue is actually the fact that there's physically not enough housing to house everyone, and certain people will go homeless because there's physically not enough houses. That's the main issue. And so we have to develop a method of making sure that the market itself, you said markets are not the answer to everything, but they are the answer to most economic issues. And the reason why is that as long as we're able to get rid of all of um, the unfairness in such market mechanisms, right? So as long as we're able to make sure that the laws and rules are such that people are unable to earn profits unfairly, right? As I spoke about in the first slide of this presentation, well then the market mechanism is actually beautiful because it allows for the distribution of computation across society of the value of different things. So you don't have to have a supercomputer determining the prices of apples and bread and houses and things like that. So we distribute that to the rest of society, and therefore we're able to have a very efficient economy that is able to accurately determine the value of various different things. But we do have to guard it with laws, and we have to make sure things such as positive and negative externalities are appropriately compensated for. A lot of the things that people are asking questions about are actually, various different positive and negative externalities. The Georgist position is to make sure that those things are compensated for properly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ari. Samuel, you definitely generated lots of questions here and a big response because there are lots of questions in the queue. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of getting everybody in, that just try to make it under 3 minutes, just so
Okay.
we can get everybody some time here. So, Phil, you're next.
Yeah, I already covered part of my question, but I think it's much broader than that because, yeah, I could see one island being recuperated. I am concerned about nature. I mean, like the wetlands are so broad, there's so many species, there's certain government reserves, but I rather doubt if economics could be the measure of all things. I even doubt if man is the measure of all things. And it just seems like it's embedded in economics, and man is the measure of all things. There are other living species that live and they need land and they can't pay taxes. So we have to take care of it. Even if we take care of it, that is still man is the measure of all things. We think it's deserving that they should have this park or something. We make the decisions that we should not make all the decisions because other living beings are in the world. So man is not the measure of all things.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about who has the ability to enforce their what they want to do. So unfortunately for some, and fortunately for many others, man is in charge of the world, and so we have to come together and agree upon what we're going to do with various different pieces of land. It's not up to the elks. What happens to their environment. So we have to be the ones making that decision, and it's going to be up to politics at the end of the day. So as long as people are able to come together in a consensus and say, this plot of land is very, very important for biodiversity, we want to protect it. As long as they're able to make that decision, Georgism is the best system to be able to implement that because it is placing the emphasis precisely on land
Well, that
and its
seems to
use.
be at least requiring a moral understanding beyond man in
Well,
some sense. So
okay,
yeah, there's moral dimension to this. Thank you.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, Will, you're next.
Yes, thanks, Ronan. My point is rather general rather than detailed, and it's to do with the statement: if you are receiving income without creating wealth, then someone somewhere is receiving wealth without creating income. Now,
No, the other way, it's creating wealth without receiving the corresponding income.
creating wealth without receiving income.
Yeah.
Right. Perhaps you just off balance me a little bit. But what I'm struggling to figure is my thinking is that the person who receives income without creating wealth probably doesn't exist. And there isn't a lot of time to go into
Okay.
that. But
I mean, so
um,
you
it,
disagree with
it,
that premise, I guess.
oh yes, oh
Okay.
yes. And I would start with a newborn baby. That baby, on the face of it, hasn't yet created wealth,
Hmm.
or is it, or one of them. But
Yeah.
that child is um, whether it's
Receiving wealth, yeah.
wealth or income. We get a little bit confused there. But that child is still a full contributor in the sense that he or she energizes the person who goes out to work. So I don't really want to take it any further than that, but I'll
Okay,
just
I can
like
address that, yeah. So
question the premise of that statement.
there are a few Georgists who are against or who are for things such as inheritance taxes, such and such. For those reasons that you outlined, the person who, just got born, he has no right to things that he has not created, right? I am against that because I'm a firm believer of, the ability of people to do whatever they want with their wealth, including giving it away to whoever they want. So I personally am against that, and many other Georgists are as well. But there is some debate on that. But I don't understand what you mean by people uh, who receive income without generating wealth don't exist. Landlords, they receive income every month from the rent on their land,
Oh.
and in order to receive that wealth, they for that month didn't do anything. They just
Okay, I know where this will take us. It will take us to a long drawn out debate.
Okay.
And we haven't got time for that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Thank
I do disagree because
Okay.
I'll make one last statement and move on. I would say with this statement, you would need to define whether you're talking instantaneously, whether the person receiving wealth, or this statement is for a set point in time, or is it drawn out? Is it instantaneous or is it continuous? But I'll just throw that out there because we just can't go into a long debate on
Okay.
this.
That's
But
yeah.
this is a
So
statement that, given time, I would dearly like to delve into a bit more.
Okay.
Okay, that's all.
thank you, Will. So
Thank you.
we actually are coming toward the end of the presentation, believe it or not, in the questions. We have three people who are still up to ask questions. Now, Ari, your hand is still up. I know you asked a question, unless I missed you, but I don't think I did. So we're going to go to Rami, and we're going to basically end.
Yeah, I got to ask my question. I'm going to lower my hand. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No problem. I just wanted to make sure I was not messing things up here. But we're going to ask the three questions that are left, and then you can stick around for a bit if you wish. But that'll constitute the end of the presentation. So, Rami, you're next.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you, Samuel, for coming here tonight.
Thank you.
Sitting on Georgism. I think Georgism, what George did was give us a way to create a form of funding public government as a public good. That's a thing that gives us courts, order, helps to enable and smooth civilization, and it fits nicely in that slot of how do you fund the government, but it sits within a wider context of governing in general, and to the extent possible, perhaps we can leave it up to local communities to decide when and or if ever there'll be exemptions. For instance, will retirees get to live out the end of their days in the homes that still make sense for them to live in? Do you want to create an exemption for that? Do you want an exemption for a nonprofit hospital? Yes or no? About a higher educational institution? And then how often do you want to reassess? Is that building still living up to its original thing that qualified for it as an exemption or not? And if it isn't, then perhaps it's time to reassess and take it out of the exemption pool. That's all I really wanted to add. Thank you.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's various different ways. This doesn't have to be, a single cookie cutter implementation. There's various different ways that all of these portions of Georgism can be implemented, and different societies can, or different parts of society, different counties, different states, different provinces can implement them slightly differently. So yeah, that's a great point.
Great, thank you very much. So Randy, you're next. Randall, you have a question?
Sorry, when I was trying to unmute. Mine's and by the way, thank you, Sam, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Mine's more a theoretical question. When you were talking about corporations and the lost productivity, I think it tends to view taxes as if some organization is just taking the money. Where you're talking about a land tax, it seems like the government is spending the money in some useful purpose. So to me, if you want to do a tax on the land, you're going to have to determine the productivity of the land if you want to equate it to the current income tax. But let's take it in a little different direction. If I was to say that we took the income tax and we just grossed it up and said that's part of the employee's productivity, and then we took that away from the employee, basically what we're doing is exactly the same thing as an income tax, although it has the benefit of being only taxable when the employee's productivity generates a profit. So in other words, let's take that example. Take an employee, grows his wages up by 30%, take the tax and then give it to the government. What's the difference? You're taxing it based on the productivity. Only the better part of having an income tax is if the productivity lacks or there's a problem with it, the income tax is reduced. You're not going to get that with the land transfer tax unless you determine the productivity of the land almost every year, almost every day.
Can you?
That's a theoretical question and statement.
Yeah, I didn't quite get the income tax scheme that you were talking about. I think I was a little bit confused with that.
Okay, well, what is taxes used for? They're used to do all sorts of services for the individual and some for the corporation. I didn't make a distinction there, but there is a distinction. So what you're doing is you're saying that's part of the employees. Let's just say all the income tax goes for the benefit of people, building highways, doing hospitalization, teaching the kids, teaching their children. All of it goes for that particular function. So what's the difference if a corporation was to take the employee's wages, gross it up by the tax rate, and then the government takes that from the employee?
Well, that's what happens.
In other words, I'm saying it's a part of the employee's compensation, part of their productivity. The advantage, though, is, first of all, if the productivity drops, the income taxes drops as well. But if you're going to tax land in the way you're talking about, you've got to tax it based on the productivity to the overall corporation, to the business. Or else, how are you going to tax it? So what I'm saying is income tax is probably, this is as much as I hate it, income tax is probably a much better system than basing it just on the land.
Okay, so you're saying
that's the proposition I'm making.
You're saying the income tax is because it's a portion of the productivity of the worker. When the productivity of the worker goes up, the income tax goes up. When the productivity of the worker goes down, income tax goes down.
Precisely. And the taxes itself is spent on the benefit of the employee.
Yeah, but it disincentivizes work to the extent that we have an income tax. So you can imagine if we had 100% income tax, what's the effect, right? We get essentially communism. People, whatever one person makes is taken from them, and everybody essentially earns for themselves anything that they need, regardless of how much they work. That's what 100% income tax does.
Well, what you're going to say is if you take 100% of the corporation's revenue and taxes on the land, it's the same deal.
It's not the same deal. So I'll differentiate the two. So for the income, no matter how much a person works, that earnings is taken away from them, and then they get everything that they need, provided to them from society. And essentially that the incentive structure created from that is such that, okay, why should I work? Because I'm getting everything I need, and everything I work for is getting taken away from me in the first place. So at 100% income tax, there's no need to work, and so nobody works. And you can see that in the supply and demand curve that I showed earlier. The deadweight loss portion will grow to the entirety of the economy. And so the economy will be 100% inefficient. There will be no work done at all. That's what happens with 100% income tax. Now you can say what happens with 90% income tax. It's pretty much the same thing. 80%, pretty much the same thing.
What happens if you tax a corporation's revenue at 100%? You do your land tax at 100%. It'd be the same deal.
So land is different. So if you were to, the corporation essentially has various different expenditures, right? It has wages that has to pay for its workers. It has the land value tax that it has to pay for the land that it uses, and then it also has profits that it must pay to its shareholders. Now, the profits section I will talk about in the next presentation, so I'll leave that out. But if we just talk about the wages that are being paid to the workers and the taxes in the form of land value tax, no matter how efficient the workers are working. If the workers are better, then they're going to get paid more, right? Or if the more you hire workers, the more you're going to pay the workers in terms of wages to workers. The land itself is determined by the neighborhood as well. So it's not the same thing. It's not like as soon as you're able to hire more workers, all of a sudden the land value tax goes up. No, it stays the same because you're paying the workers.
How are you going to determine the land tax?
It's determined in the two main methods that I talked about earlier. So either a land assessment method or I would prefer a market mechanism that is
No,
able
but
to.
hold on. You've
Okay,
determined you've determined the
Randy,
market.
just for the sake of, I apologize. I hate to break in,
Fair
but
enough. I
just,
got it. I got it, Ronan. I understand. I hear you.
it's just because we're officially done, but there are people who are still waiting. So my suggestion is, because there's a lot of interest, and this is a really interesting discussion between you and Sam. I think that we can extend the meeting if people are interested in asking questions. And Randy, we can come back to it because I'll stay. I have a question I want to ask, and I haven't had a chance. So,
Yeah, I have to go, Ronan, so I got to leave. But listen, thanks very much. I understand the time constraint. Thanks, Samuel. Ronan,
Thank you, Rand.
I'll see you guys later. Take care.
bye bye. Okay, Bill Hollings, it's your turn.
Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies, Alex. You had your hand up and then you put it down. So, Bill, I'm going to go to Alex first, and then I'll go to you. Okay.
I appreciate my question was mostly asked by previous folks, so I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
Bill, you're up now.
Thanks. So two things. The first is quick, and we don't need to discuss it very much, but I think your assessment of taxes, income taxes, as a productivity loss is suspect in the sense that, like, you use the example of a 100% tax. Well, I mean, 100% divide by zero, etc. Let's stay away from that. But let's say the free market says I work for a place that I'm happy that they are paying me enough. So let's say my standard of living is I want to live at $50,000 a year. So it doesn't really matter to me whether, as long as I get that $50,000, it doesn't really matter to me whether the company has spent $60,000 and $10,000 has gone to taxes, or the company spent $1 million hiring me and everything for $940,000 or $50,000 has gone to taxes, right? All that matters is the company is willing to pay that, and I'm willing to pay that. I'm willing to live at that rate. I'm willing to work at that job for that amount of money. And hopefully that all that money that's going to the government is being spent wisely. But I don't really need to talk about that. I just want to make that point. But I do actually have a question. What do you do in the case where income, like you talk about like landlords and rent and stuff like that, but let's take the example of a software genius who comes out with a new software product, sitting in his cabin in the Northwest Territories, where he's paying absolutely zero, almost zero land tax on that. And he corners the market and accumulates half of society's wealth as a result. And society can't possibly benefit from that because that person is paying almost next to nothing in terms of rent, land tax, but has accumulated an enormous amount of society's wealth or income or annual income. So how do you balance that imbalance?
Okay, so first of all, you're saying that this person cornered the market. So what that means essentially is monopoly.
No. Let's say it's take Elon Musk. Okay, the guy's worth half a $500 billion, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a $500 billion that has, even though he's made it legitimately in our free market society, it's still $500 billion. Essentially, he could be living in a shack in anywhere and paying almost no land tax.
You think Elon's wealth is not solely determined by the intellectual property that he owns? Like, that's the majority of his wealth is his companies and the intellectual properties that they own. If everyone was able to build Teslas, then Elon would not be able to make as much money as he could.
No, everybody is able to buy Teslas because you wouldn't be taxing it.
Build Teslas. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Only Tesla is able to build Teslas, right? So we have this technological innovation that is being protected by intellectual property.
And the person who owns that intellectual property. You're making an assumption there. Amazon. Let's talk about Amazon because cars are cars. So anybody can. I mean, lots of people do. I mean, I can go to Chevrolet and buy an electric car, right? So that's just the free market at work. You don't need IP to protect that. or Amazon. There's nothing magical about what Amazon does. They just do a good job. And in the meantime, Jeff Bezos has again become a half trillionaire,
Yeah.
right? So those are examples where all that money is effectively now gone from society.
So there is something to say about network effects, and Georges always talk about various different areas where there could be different kinds of things that affect wealth production besides all this land stuff. So we talk about network effects and IP and how they affect each other all the time. But what I would like to say is, if the company or the person is not taking anything away from society, and they've earned all of their wealth solely through their work in improving society, I see no reason why we should limit how much wealth they gain, because it's through a just means.
But that money is gone from society, right?
That's not how the economy works. It's not gone from society. The money is still there. We'll talk about money in the next presentation. Don't worry about that. We will get to it. A lot of the questions, and this is why I put these two presentations together. I did not want to split it up. They are very related, but just in the interest of time, it had to be split.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. So I think that officially the presentation is over and the meeting is over. However, given the interest, we're going to go on a little bit longer. And John Moniz, you have a question, so go ahead. It's your turn, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Ronan. I had to unmute. Yeah, thank you, Samuel. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I think my question might be a little basic, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
So I think you're saying that you only pay taxes if you own land. Will that sort of incentivize people to rent only and not own land?
So
Because that way they could make wealth without paying taxes.
When you rent, you're essentially paying for. So let's take this land value tax system. Imagine there's a full land value tax and there's no other taxes, right? So certain people will rent a plot of land and they'll build, let's say, a 20-story apartment building on it, and then the revenue that they get from the land from the renters who are renting the apartments, that revenue will then go into the land value tax, right? So they're essentially paying, the renters are paying for the land by proxy, essentially.
Okay. As far as their income is, the people that do not own the land wouldn't be paying any tax. I'm just wondering if that would kind of push people to not want to own land, which in fact would lower the price of land overall, which would lower the taxes too, I guess.
What would end up happening is that there would be no economic, the value of land as a one-time purchase would drop to zero, right? Because when you purchase something as a one-time purchase, what are you saying? You're saying that this thing, is gonna be profitable for me. But if all of the profits that are incurred by the land are taken as a tax, then there is no external profits to be made from that land, and so therefore the sale value, the one-time sale value of the land will asymptotically drop to zero. What will happen then is essentially anyone can purchase a piece of land as long as they pay the tax for it. There will be no benefit to being a land owner versus a land leaser. So that's what would end up happening.
So you could get revenue from the lands and that would be worth something.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I do have a quick question before we leave, and I just want you, Samuel, to elaborate a little bit on patents as commons. I understood that correctly, right? The idea is that patents would be commons, but I'm sort of lost on how incentive would not be lost as well. I think you talked about it, but I didn't quite follow your arguments. And also, the other thing that I'm not clear on, patents, according to Georgism, is sort of equivalent to land in that it's a constant. But patents are not constants, are they? Because there are different patents that are taken out every every year, every day. And also there are iterations on patents and so on and so forth. So it becomes very nuanced what a patent is and how
Yeah.
people develop on them. I'm just trying to understand the notion and how it would work.
So the idea is that patents are essentially just ideas that we allow people to monopolize, right? And so ideas are part of the commons.
Right. So, okay, I understand that. I mean, I understand ideas are out there, and
Yeah.
once somebody comes up with an idea, it should be something that is available to everybody. I'm wondering if there is a relationship to what we call like open source. Is that sort of an idea that is related?
Yes, it's very related, and that's actually a really good question. So the programming sector has come to this conclusion before anyone else has, essentially, or at least Henry George came to it first, but programming has come to it very quickly. And the reason for that is that programs are products that are pure ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They have nothing else to them. And so economically, it's very hard to justify closed source programs because people can copy the code, people can just create multiple instances of a piece of code with essentially no cost. And so when it comes to things like ideas that are, essentially just digital, they're information, uh, patents are the same. It makes no sense to kind of close it off and try to justify um, trying to charge people for it. So that's why open source has grown and blown up and become the main actual economic sector of programming. It's way past any closed source software out there. So it just goes to show how much it makes sense to also consider patents and copyrights and other things in the IP space. To consider those things for essentially uh, changing the way the monopolization of those things work.
Hmm. Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. There's a lot to talk about there. We can
Yeah.
go on for a very long time, but I think we're going to stop. Howard, you have the last question, and then we're going to call it a night.
It's not a question. Just want to thank Samuel for a very provocative and interesting presentation. And I'm really looking forward to the next part, part two. I'm specifically interested in sort of George's broader theories of value, which would include labor theories of value, what he has to say, what he might have to say about wage labor, income interest, capital, investment interest, and social value more generally. So I think you've really teed it up nicely for the next round of discussions and placing Georgism within a sort of a broader set of economic theories. I'm curious too generally about some of the crossover and maybe differences between Georgism and classical Marxism, and where they overlap and where they depart. So I was hoping maybe theories of value and theory of labor and capital would get at some of that. I know you've got Locke as the foundation in terms of property rights, but I'm very curious to see where it goes from there. So just to say thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to the next part of the discussion.
Thank you. Well, that was a really good review, I guess. But to disappoint you a bit, the theory of value is different. So yeah, George and Marx, I think, might have had some correspondences or just some talkings about each other. They essentially don't agree with each other at all. Obviously, Marx has the labor theory of value, and with George, we take the subjective theory of value. So essentially, value is what people are willing to buy a thing for. You can put as much labor as you want into moving a rock back and forth. It's not going to make it any more valuable.
Let me go back to what the other gentleman was saying about hospital and their sort of, or even the turtles in terms of whether market value whether the market can adequately be on its own a determinant of value. And those might be broader philosophical questions, right?
Yeah, as long as we make sure that we remove all of the issues behind things like interest and land ownership, things that pervert the actual mechanism of markets, then we'll come to see that the market mechanism itself is not the issue. It's underlying theories of property that are the actual issue.
Over financialized capitalism.
I'll talk about interest in the next talk. So wait for that.
Okay,
there we go.
Thank you, Howard. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Alla, I'll pass it to you and you can close it off.
Yeah, thank you, Ronan, and thank you, Samuel. That was really intriguing, provocative, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And again, if someone didn't ask his questions, please, we're gonna post it on YouTube soon, so please go there and ask continue discussion. We would appreciate it. Everyone would see it. And thank you very much for everyone who could come and stayed so long and give us energy and developed our thoughts to make us better and makes our society better. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.